For years, my family cast me as the broke relative who needed their pity. They assumed I walked into their lavish anniversary party to apologize and beg for a seat at the table. They were wrong. I arrived to end the fictional play they had written about my life. When I slapped my new salary slip onto the mahogany table, the first person to turn pale was not my stepmother, but my father's lawyer. My name is Megan Hartley, to the Human Resources Department at Northbridge Ledger Group in Minneapolis. I am a 33-year-old senior financial analyst with a spotless record, a credit score that sits comfortably in the high 700s, and a reputation for being the person you call when the numbers refuse to balance. I live in a condo overlooking the Mississippi River. I wear tailored wool coats against the Minnesota chill, and I have built a life defined by precision, competence, and quiet success. But to the Hartley family down in Savannah, Georgia, I am none of those things. To my father Calvin, my stepmother Elaine, and my half-brother Brent, I am simply the poor relative. I am the cautionary tale they whisper about over mint juleps and sweet tea. I am the family charity case, the one who supposedly scrapes by on pennies, the one who fled the warmth of the South because she could not handle the pressure of their social circle. For over a decade, I have been the punchline to a joke I never told, a standing gag in a comedy written entirely by their own insecurities. It is a strange thing to be the black sheep of a family, not because you are a criminal or a failure, but because you simply refuse to play the game of ostentatious wealth that they are so addicted to. My father, Calvin, runs a mid-sized development firm that has been teetering on the edge of solvency for as long as I can remember, though you would never know it by looking at his driveway. Elaine, a woman whose love language is passive-aggressive commentary, treats shopping like a competitive sport. And then there is Brent, my younger brother by 6 years, who has never held a job for longer than 6 months but somehow always has the latest European sports car. They needed someone to look down on. It creates a necessary contrast. If Megan is doing poorly, then they must be doing well. If Megan is the one struggling in the frozen north, then their life in the humid, magnolia-scented comfort of Georgia is a triumph. For years, I played my part, mostly because I did not realize I was in a play. I assumed their pity was just a clumsy form of love. I sent gifts for every birthday and anniversary. I'm talking about thoughtful things, not cheap trinkets. When Brent turned 25, I sent him a leather briefcase that cost me $400, thinking it might encourage him to take his job hunt seriously. He never acknowledged receiving it. 2 weeks later, I saw a photo on his social media feed where he was holding a canvas tote bag from a luxury brand, with a caption making fun of corporate drones. When Elaine complained about her sciatica, I researched the best orthopedic pillows and had a premium set shipped to the house. It cost nearly $200, including shipping. 3 months later, during an obligatory FaceTime call where I stared mostly at her ceiling fan, she mentioned her back was killing her because she had nothing decent to sleep on. When I asked about the pillows, she waved a hand dismissively and said she thinks she put them in the guest room or maybe gave them to the housekeeper because the fabric was too rough. I kept trying. I transferred money when the hints became too heavy to ignore. It was never a direct request. Of course, it was always a crisis. A car repair that cost $600, a veterinary bill for their purebred golden retriever that suddenly spiked to $1,200. I would send $500 here, $300 there, attaching a note saying, "Hope this helps," or "Love you guys." The response was always silence. Not a thank you card, not a text, just the digital notification from my bank that the transfer had been accepted. And then, a week later, I would see photos of them dining at the Grey or booking a weekend at a resort in Hilton Head, behaving as if that crisis had never happened. I was funding the margins of their lifestyle while they laughed at the center of mine. The turning point, the moment the cracks in my denial became a shattered window, happened last Thanksgiving. I had decided to fly down to Savannah. It had been 2 years since I had seen them in person, and I told myself that maybe the distance had distorted my perception. Maybe they really did miss me. I booked a flight that cost me nearly $800 because it was peak season, rented a car so I would not inconvenience them with a pickup, and drove to the sprawling colonial house on the outskirts of the city. The driveway was full of cars I did not recognize. I walked in, carrying a bottle of vintage wine that the sommelier in Minneapolis had assured me was exceptional, only to find a full-blown party in progress. It wasn't just family. It was neighbors, business partners, people from the club. Elaine greeted me with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked me up and down, taking in my gray cashmere sweater and dark jeans. It was a perfectly appropriate outfit for a casual family dinner, which is what I had been told this was. It was not appropriate for a cocktail party where everyone else was in silk and velvet. "Oh, Megan," she said, her voice loud enough to carry over the jazz music playing softly in the background. "You made it. We weren't sure you could afford the time off, or the ticket." She laughed, and the two women standing next to her laughed with her. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I forced a smile. "It's good to see you, Elaine." "Well, go find a spot," she said, waving vaguely toward the dining room. "We already set the main table, so we put you in the sunroom. It's cozier there anyway." I walked into the dining room. The main table was a masterpiece of tablescaping, set for 12 people with gold-rimmed chargers and elaborate floral centerpieces. My father was at the head, holding court with a glass of scotch. He saw me, gave a generic wave that looked more like he was shooing a fly, and went back to his conversation. Brent was there, laughing with a girl I had never met. I walked past them, through the French doors, into the sunroom. There was a card table set up, a literal folding card table, the kind you use for puzzles. It was covered with a mismatched tablecloth that was slightly too small. There were 3 chairs, one for me, 2 for the teenage children of a neighbor I didn't know. I sat down. I could see the main table through the glass doors. I watched them toast. I watched servers pour wine. My wine, I realized with a jolt, as I recognized the label, into the glasses of strangers. No one came to ask if I wanted a drink. No one came to introduce me to the guests. Later, I needed to use the restroom. I had to weave through the kitchen to avoid disrupting the speeches happening in the main room. As I neared the service entrance, I heard voices. It was Elaine and one of her friends, a woman who dripped with diamonds and smelled of expensive gardenias. They were standing just out of sight, near the pantry. "It is sweet of you to include her," the friend was saying. "Most families would be embarrassed." "Oh, we try," Elaine sighed, the sound heavy with performed martyrdom. "Calvin feels so guilty. You know, she just never really launched. Minneapolis? Doing some clerical work. I think she lives in a tiny apartment, probably barely 50 square feet. We have to send her money sometimes just to make sure she has heat." I froze, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Send me money?" "That is tragic," the friend said. "It is what it is," Elaine replied, and I could hear the smirk in her voice. "We tell Brent to be kind to her, but you know how hard it is when there is nothing in common. Honest to God. Susan, if that girl is rich, or even successful, I would walk barefoot down River Street in the middle of July." They both erupted into laughter, high, tinkling, cruel laughter that echoed off the stainless steel appliances. I did not storm in. I did not flip the table. That is what the old Megan might have done. The Megan who wanted their approval, the new Megan, the analyst who managed portfolios worth millions of dollars, felt a sudden, icy calm wash over her. It was the sensation of a variable finally being defined in a complex equation. I backed away silently. I went back to the sunroom, picked up my purse, and walked out the side door. I drove my rental car to a hotel in downtown Savannah, checked into a suite that cost $450 a night, and ordered room service. That night, I opened my laptop. I did not cry. Instead, I opened a new spreadsheet. I named it The Ledger. I began to go back through 7 years of digital records. I have a mind for data. It is why I am good at my job. I dug up every Venmo transaction, every bank transfer, every Western Union receipt. I found the emails where Brent asked for a loan for a startup that never existed. I found the text messages from my father asking me to cover the insurance premium on the lake house because his liquidity was tied up in escrow. I found the receipts for the gifts, the tracking numbers, the flight confirmations. I spent 6 hours that night compiling data. I categorized every dollar I had ever poured into the black hole of the Hartley family. The total was staggering. It was not just a few $100s here and there. Over 8 years, including the emergency funds and the temporary help, the sum was close to $45,000. $45,000. That was a down payment on a house. That was a luxury car. That was my retirement contribution for 2 years. I looked at the number glowing on my screen in the dark hotel room. Then I looked at the photos Elaine had posted on Instagram an hour ago. A selfie of her and my father, captioned "Family is everything," with the hashtag blessed. I was not in the photo. I was not even tagged. I realized then that I had made a fundamental error in my assessment of our relationship. I thought I was the disappointing daughter trying to earn her place. I was not. I was an asset. I was a diversification strategy. I was a financial appendix, ignored until I was inflamed, and then removed or drained as necessary. They did not hate me. Hate implies passion. They simply viewed me as a resource that had low yield but high reliability. They mocked me to elevate their own social stock, and they milked me to subsidize the very lifestyle they claimed I could not afford. I closed the laptop. I did not sleep well that night, but when I woke up, the hurt was gone. It had been replaced by something far more useful. I went back to Minneapolis the next morning. I did not call them to say I was leaving. When Elaine texted me 2 days later saying, "Must have missed you when you left. Hope the flight was cheap," I did not reply. I simply saved the screenshot, added it to a folder named Evidence, and went back to work. I knew, with the certainty of a woman who studies market trends, that the market of their lies was due for a crash. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to short the stock. The silence from Savannah lasted exactly 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. It was a peaceful interval, the kind of quiet that allows a person to actually hear their own thoughts. During that time, I focused on quarterly projections for Northbridge and reorganized my investment portfolio. I almost tricked myself into believing that perhaps they were learning to stand on their own feet, or at least that they had found a new audience for their constant dramas. Then, my phone vibrated at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. It was Brent. I stared at the screen, the blue light harsh in my dark bedroom. The message was casual, breezy, as if we had just spoken yesterday over coffee. "Hey sis, hope the Arctic isn't freezing you to death. Listen, I have got a line on a massive opportunity, pre-IPO stuff. My buddy works for the developer, need liquid cash for the buy-in by Friday. Can you float me $4,000? Guaranteed return in 90 days. I will split the profit with you." I read the text 3 times. There was no inquiry about my health, no question about my job, no mention of the fact that he had missed my birthday 2 weeks prior. Just a demand wrapped in a hustle, $4,000. He asked for it with the same casual tone one might use to ask to borrow a phone charger. I did not reply immediately. I sat up, adjusted my pillows, and felt that old familiar knot of obligation tighten in my chest. It is a conditioned response, bred into me since childhood. The idea that because I had stability, I owed it to the chaos of my family to act as a dampener. Before I could decide how to phrase a polite refusal, the second wave hit. The next morning, while I was brewing my coffee, Elaine called. This was rare. Elaine hates speaking on the phone unless she has an audience, so a direct call meant she was either bored or desperate. I answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello, Elaine?" "Megan!" Her voice was shrill, trembling with a theatrically calibrated panic. "Thank God you picked up. It is a disaster. A complete disaster." I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching the steam rise from my mug. "What happened? Is Dad okay?" "It is the house," she sobbed. "The storm last night. You saw the news, didn't you? The wind tore right through the north wing. The roof over the master suite is compromised. Water is coming in. Megan, it is ruining the hardwood floors your grandmother loved so much." I checked the weather app on my iPad. There had been a thunderstorm in Savannah. Yes, but the wind speeds were recorded at 30 miles per hour, hardly a hurricane. "Do you have insurance?" I asked calmly. "The deductible," she wailed. "And the insurance adjuster can't come out for 2 weeks. We need to put a tarp down and hire a contractor immediately to stop the leaks or the mold will set in. Your father is beside himself. His blood pressure is through the roof. I don't know who else to turn to. You are the only one with liquidity." She hesitated on the word liquidity, making it sound like a dirty word, something vulgar that I possessed while they possessed only taste and misfortune. "How much, Elaine?" $7,000, she said quickly, too quickly. "Just to get the emergency repairs started and cover the deductible. We will pay you back as soon as the insurance check clears. I promise on my mother's grave." I closed my eyes. $11,000 total. If I combined Brent's scheme and Elaine's catastrophe, I did not give them everything they asked for. I told myself I was being firm. I told myself I was setting boundaries. I transferred $1,500 to Brent, telling him that was all I could spare for his investment. I wired $3,000 to my father's joint account for the roof repairs, attaching a note that this was a loan to be repaid when the insurance claim was settled. $4,500. It was a significant sum. It was enough to pay for a luxury vacation or a significant upgrade to my car. Instead, I sent it into the void. The reaction was immediate and telling. From Brent: "Cool, thanks." From Elaine: "Received. We will try to make it work. Pray for us." Then, the silence returned. It was abrupt, like a door slamming shut the moment the transaction was verified. I waited. I don't know why I waited, but I did. I waited for a photo of the repaired roof. I waited for an update on Brent's investment. I waited for a simple, "How are you?" 1 week passed, then 2. I decided to do what I do best. I analyzed the data. I opened Instagram and Facebook. I had to use a secondary account to view their stories properly, as they often blocked me from seeing specific posts, claiming it was accidental settings, but I knew better. On the 3rd day after I sent the money, Elaine posted a photo. It was not of a damaged roof. It was not of a contractor's van. She was standing in front of a mirror in a high-end boutique in Charleston, South Carolina. Draped over her arm was a handbag I recognized immediately. It was a limited edition leather tote from a French designer house. I knew the retail price because I had admired it in a magazine months ago. The bag cost $2,800. The caption read, "Sometimes a girl just needs a little retail therapy to get through the hard times. Self-care survivor." I felt a coldness spread through my stomach. The hard times she was surviving were apparently funded by my emergency transfer. There was no mention of the roof. In the background of the photo, through the boutique window, the weather looked sunny and perfect. I clicked over to Brent's profile. His investment opportunity had apparently yielded immediate dividends. He had posted a series of videos from a VIP section of a nightclub in Miami. He was holding a bottle of vodka that cost $400 at bottle service prices. He was wearing a new watch. The timestamp on the video was 48 hours after my transfer cleared. "Living the dream," his caption said. "You have to spend money to make money." I sat at my desk in Minneapolis, surrounded by my modest furniture and my meticulously organized life, and I felt like a fool, a complete, absolute fool. They hadn't needed the money, they just wanted it. They viewed my bank account as a faucet that they could turn on with a few well-chosen lies, and I had obliged them. I had let them drain me, not just of cash, but of dignity. I decided to run a test, a control experiment. I stopped reaching out completely. I did not text them on Sunday as was my habit. I did not like their posts. I did not send the usual check-in email to my father. I wanted to see how long it would take for them to notice my absence when there was no money attached to my presence. Day 1, silence. Day 5, silence. Day 12, silence. On day 20, something significant happened in my life. I was promoted. After 3 years of grueling hours and high-pressure deliverables, the partners at Northbridge Ledger Group named me the new director of strategic analytics. It came with a corner office, a significant raise, and a level of professional respect I had worked my entire adult life to achieve. I was bursting with pride. I wanted to tell someone who shared my blood. It is a primitive instinct, the desire to make your parents proud, no matter how toxic they are. I called my father first. The phone rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. "You have reached Calvin Hartley. I am busy making deals. Leave a message." I didn't leave a message. I called Elaine. She answered on the second ring, but she sounded distracted, as if she was in the middle of a conversation with someone else. "Elaine? Megan? Is everything okay? Is it an emergency?" Her tone was sharp, defensive. She was already bracing herself for a request, projecting her own parasitic nature onto me. No emergency," I said, my voice faltering slightly. "I just wanted to share some good news. I got promoted today. I am a director now." There was a pause. I could hear clinking glasses in the background. "Oh," she said. It was the flattest sound I had ever heard. "That is nice, Megan. Does that mean you will be working even more hours? You sound tired. You really should take care of your skin. Stress ages a woman terribly." "I am happy about it, Elaine. It is a big step." "Well, that is good for you," she said, her voice drifting away. "Look, honey, we are actually just sitting down to dinner with the Mayweathers. Can I call you back next week? Your father is asking for the salt." "Wait, is Dad there? Can I just tell him quickly?" "He is eating, Megan. You know he hates to be disturbed when he is eating steak. I will tell him you called. Bye now." The line went dead. I lowered the phone from my ear. I sat in my new office, with its view of the Minneapolis skyline glittering in the twilight, and I looked at the dark screen of my mobile. She had not asked about the new job title. She had not asked if I was celebrating. She had not even said congratulations. She had treated my life-changing news as a minor annoyance, an interruption to her dinner with the Mayweathers. I opened my banking app. I looked at the transaction history, the $3,000 to Elaine, the $1,500 to Brent. Then I looked at the photos I had screenshotted, the handbag, the nightclub. I realized then that they did not see me as a person. They did not even see me as a family member. To them, I was nothing more than a remote server, a faceless, unfeeling machine that processed their requests and dispensed resources. When the machine tried to speak, tried to share a human experience, they were confused and irritated. Why was the ATM talking? Why was the checkbook asking for validation? I did not cry this time. The tears I had shed in the hotel room in Savannah had been the last of them. This time, I felt something harder settling in my chest. It felt like steel. It felt like the cold, unyielding resolve of an auditor finding a discrepancy that could no longer be ignored. I opened my laptop and created a new folder within my evidence drive. I named it Phase 2, the deficit. I downloaded the receipt of my transfer. I screenshotted the timestamps of their calls. I juxtaposed them with the timestamps of their luxury purchases. I created a timeline that showed the exact correlation between their crises and their splurges. I looked at the phone one last time. "Next time," I whispered to the empty office, my voice steady and low. "Next time you call, you won't be speaking to your daughter. You will be speaking to the Director of Strategic Analytics, and I am about to audit this entire relationship." I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, a much better vintage than the one my father drank, and slept soundly. I knew the invitation for the anniversary party would be coming soon. The annual cycle of validation was approaching, and this time, I would not be bringing a gift. I would be bringing the bill. The silence from the South stretched on for nearly a year, a long, arid season of zero contact that I had come to interpret as peace. I had settled into my new role as director. My days filled with risk assessments and strategic forecasts, my nights quiet and unclaimed by familial crises. I had almost convinced myself that they had forgotten me entirely, that I had finally been redacted from the Hartley family narrative. But toxic families are like bad debt. Just when you think you have written them off, they reappear on the balance sheet. It arrived on a Tuesday in late October. sandwiched between a utility bill and a flyer for a local pizza place. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, and made of the kind of textured cardstock that costs $3 a unit. My name was calligraphed in gold ink, not handwritten, but printed in a font designed to mimic the stroke of a master penman. I carried it into my kitchen, my heart doing that traitorous little skip it always does when they reach out. I used a letter opener to slice the seal. Inside lay an invitation that smelled faintly of expensive vanilla and desperate ambition. Calvin and Elaine Hartley cordially invite you to the 30th anniversary jubilee of Hartley Meridian Holdings and a celebration of family legacy. The venue listed was the St. Maro Plaza in Atlanta. I stared at the card. The St. Maro was not just a hotel. It was an institution. It was where senators held fundraisers and old money debutantes had their coming-out balls. Hosting an event there, even a modest one, started at $50,000 just for the room rental. For a dinner with the 500 esteemed guests mentioned on the RSVP card, the cost would easily eclipse 6 figures. It made no sense. 11 months ago, they couldn't afford a tarp for a leaking roof. Now, they were throwing a party that cost more than my condo? I flipped the card over. There was no handwritten note, no "Miss you, Megan," no "Hope you can come," just a generic, pre-printed sentence at the bottom. Join us as we reunite to honor the past and invest in the future. Reunite, a sterile, calculated word. The next day, I sat across from Tess Morgan in the glass-walled cafeteria of Northbridge Ledger Group. Tess was our head of internal legal counsel, a woman who could spot a loophole in a contract from across a crowded room. She was also the only person in Minneapolis who knew the full extent of my family history. She held the invitation between 2 manicured fingers as if it were contaminated evidence. "This is aggressive," Tess said, dropping the card onto the table. "St. Maro Plaza? Is your dad secretly laundering money for a cartel? Or did he win the lottery and forget to tell you?" "Neither," I said, picking at my salad. "He has been crying poverty for a decade. Last year he borrowed $1,500 from me for a roof that I'm pretty sure never got fixed." Tess narrowed her eyes. "So where is the capital coming from? You don't book the St. Maro on a promise and a smile. They require a 50% deposit up front. We are talking about $75,000, minimum, laid down months ago." "Maybe business turned around," I suggested, though the words tasted like ash. "Maybe he finally closed a big deal. Or maybe he's leveraged to the hilt, and this party is a show to attract new investors to pay off the old ones." Tess countered. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a professional whisper. "Megan, people do not change their character overnight. They just change their tactics. If they ignored your promotion, ignored your birthday, and ignored your existence for a year, why do they want you there now?" "To show off," I offered. "I am the daughter. It looks bad if I am not there for the legacy photo." "Maybe," Tess said, but she didn't look convinced. "But look at the dress code. Black tie and diamonds. This isn't a family reunion. This is a peacock display, and you are the gray hen they usually hide in the coop." She pulled out her phone. "Let me run a check. I have access to some databases that dig a little deeper than a standard Google search. If Hartley Meridian Holdings is throwing a party this big, there has to be a paper trail." "You don't have to do that," I said automatically. "I am not asking for permission," Tess said, tapping her screen. "I am protecting my best friend. If you are going to walk into that lion's den, I want to know if the lions are hungry or just toothless." I decided to go. I had to go. Not because I wanted their approval. That ship had sailed, sunk, and been salvaged for scrap metal long ago, but because the anomaly bothered me. My analyst brain could not reconcile the data points. The poverty and the extravagance did not align. I needed to see the variables up close. I booked a flight to Atlanta. I chose a Delta flight that cost $480, opting for main cabin because I refused to spend extra money on a trip that was essentially a reconnaissance mission. But I did not go unprepared. 2 nights before the trip, I stayed up late in my apartment. I printed out everything. The ledger spreadsheet was 18 pages long now. I printed the bank transfer receipts. I printed the emails where Brent asked for money. I printed the screenshots of Elaine's designer bag and Brent's Miami Club tab. I put everything into a slim, leather-bound portfolio. It looked like a business accessory, something a director would carry to a board meeting. In a way, that is exactly what it was. Then, I did something I had never done before. I set up a digital contingency plan. I uploaded the entire folder to a secure cloud drive. I created a shared link and set it to expire in 48 hours unless I renewed it. I sent the link to Tess with a simple instruction. If I text you the code word audit, or if you don't hear from me by midnight on Saturday, open this. It felt paranoid. It felt excessive. But as I packed my suitcase, placing a simple navy blue evening gown next to the leather portfolio, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. The invitation had said, "Invest in the future, in my family." Investment was usually a synonym for donation. I looked at the invitation one last time before zipping my bag. The word reunite seemed to glare at me. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. They didn't want me there to celebrate. They wanted me there because a missing component in their machinery was causing a malfunction, and I was the spare part. On the morning of the flight, the Minneapolis sky was a bruised purple, threatening snow. I dragged my suitcase to the door, checking my phone. My father hadn't called to ask when I was landing. Elaine hadn't texted to ask if I needed a ride from the airport. The silence remained absolute, which was the most terrifying part. If they wanted something, they usually flattered me first. The lack of flattery meant they were either entirely confident or entirely desperate. I was locking my apartment door when my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, expecting a notification from the airline. It was a text from Tess. I swiped it open. There were no emojis, no jokes, just 2 sentences that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, piercing through the wool of my coat. "Megan, do not sign anything when you get there." I frowned and started to type a reply, asking what she meant, but a second text bubbled up immediately, followed by a screenshot of a public filing document. "I just pulled the preliminary liquidity reports on your dad's company from the state registry. The ink isn't even dry on the liens. Megan, your dad's file smells like smoke. This isn't a party, it's a fire sale." I stared at the screen. The Uber driver honked from the street below, signaling he was waiting. I looked at the portfolio tucked safely in my carry-on bag. "Okay," I said to the empty hallway. "If it is a fire, then I am bringing the extinguisher." I walked out the door, into the cold air, heading toward a celebration that was already burning to the ground before the first bottle of champagne had even been popped. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress in my hotel room at the Ritz-Carlton, just 3 blocks away from the St. Maro Plaza. The room was luxurious, costing me $550 for the night, but the air inside felt thin and insufficient. My laptop was open, the screen casting a pale, clinical glow across the duvet. I had arrived in Atlanta 2 hours ago. I had not called my father. I had not texted Elaine. Instead, I had checked in, locked the door, and opened the secure file Tess had sent me during my layover. The subject line was simply, "The Red Ledger." I clicked the file open. It was not just a summary. It was an autopsy of a living company that was currently rotting from the inside out. Tess had been thorough. She had pulled court filings, lien records, and credit reports that were technically public, but usually buried deep enough that polite society never saw them. I began to read, and with every line, the glamour of the upcoming anniversary party peeled away like cheap wallpaper, revealing the black mold underneath. Hartley Meridian Holdings was not celebrating 30 years of success. It was gasping for air. The first document was a lawsuit filed 6 weeks ago by a company called Apex Concrete Solutions. They were suing for breach of contract and unpaid invoices totaling $42,000. My father had contested it, claiming substandard work, but the attached exhibits showed emails where he apologized for the delay in payment and asked for a grace period of 90 days. The second document was worse. It was a lien placed on the family home. The The very house where I had been made to sleep in the guest room with the lumpy mattress. The lien was from a high-end landscaping firm for $14,000. Elaine's prize-winning azaleas were literally being held as collateral. But the third document was the one that made my blood turn to ice. It was a filing for a short-term bridge loan taken out 11 months ago from a private equity firm called Vulture Capital Partners. The name was almost too on the nose to be real, but the terms were very real. The principal amount was $200,000. The interest rate was predatory, sitting at 18%. And the maturity date? I looked at the date on the screen. Then I looked at the calendar on the wall. The loan was due in full on the Monday following the anniversary party. That was 48 hours from now. If the loan was not repaid, or if a guarantor with substantial verified assets did not sign a restructuring agreement, Vulture Capital had the right to seize the assets listed in the security clause. I scrolled down to see what was listed as security. It was not the house. The house was already leveraged to the hilt. It was the controlling shares of the company. If Calvin Hartley did not come up with $200,000 or a credit-worthy cosigner by Monday morning, he would lose his company. He would lose his status. He would lose the only thing that made him feel like a man in this town. I sat back, the breath leaving my lungs in a rush. I did the math in my head. I added up the $42,000 for the concrete, the $14,000 for the landscapers, the $200,000 for the loan, and the estimated cost of the party tonight. Then I opened my own banking app. I looked at my total net worth, my 401k, my aggressive savings, the stock options from Northbridge that had just vested with my promotion, and the emergency fund I had built by living well below my means. The number was almost exactly what they needed. If I liquidated everything, if I drained my retirement, sold my stocks, and emptied my savings, I could cover their debt with maybe $10,000 to spare. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a miracle that they had invited me. It was a calculation. They had done their own research. They didn't know the exact penny I had, but they knew I was a director now. They knew I was single, with no children to drain my resources. They knew I lived in a modest condo and drove a sensible car. They had looked at my life and seen not a daughter, but a piggy bank ripe for the slaughter. They didn't want me to come home. They wanted me to come pay. I stood up and walked to the window. The lights of Atlanta stretched out before me, blinking indifferently. I felt a wave of nausea, followed immediately by a surge of cold, clarifying anger. "They are not inviting you to a party," I said aloud to the empty room. "They are inviting a cosigner." I understood the plan now. It was classic emotional manipulation. Step 1. Love bomb me with a fancy invitation and a VIP setting. Step 2. Publicly claim me as the beloved daughter to establish a social bond. Step 3. Corner me in a private room, present the temporary cash flow issue, and pressure me to sign the guarantee using guilt, family duty, and the immediate threat of public humiliation if I refused. They thought I was the same Megan who sent $500 when a dog got sick. They thought I was the same Megan who desperately wanted a seat at the big table. They had no idea that the Megan who was coming to dinner tonight audited billion-dollar mergers for a living. I turned back to the desk. I had 2 hours before the reception started. I could have packed my bag, gone to the airport, and flown back to Minneapolis. I could have blocked their numbers and let Vulture Capital tear their legacy apart piece by piece. But that would be too easy. That would leave the narrative in their hands. If I ran away, Elaine would tell everyone I was a coward who abandoned her family in their time of need. Calvin would play the martyr. Brent would say I was selfish. I was not going to run. I was going to rewrite the ending. I opened my briefcase. I took out the portable printer I traveled with for work. I connected it to my laptop. I began to print. I printed the lawsuit from Apex Concrete. I printed the lien on the house. I printed the loan terms from Vulture Capital. Then I reached into my digital archives and printed the personal history. The Venmo transaction logs showing every dollar I had sent them over 8 years. The screenshots of Elaine's retail therapy post dated 2 days after she begged for roof money. The tracking numbers of the birthday gifts that were never acknowledged. The log of calls. 112 calls from me to them in 5 years. 6 calls from them to me. All 6 were less than 2 minutes long and ended with a request for funds. I organized the papers into a neat stack. I pulled out a fresh manila folder. I did not label it family. I labeled it due diligence. Then, I took a sheet of hotel stationery and a heavy pen. I needed a script. I knew how they fought. Elaine fought with tears and volume. Calvin fought with disappointment and authority. Brent fought with mockery. I needed a shield against all 3. I wrote down 3 sentences. 1. I am not here to negotiate. 2. The bank of Megan Hartley is permanently closed due to fraudulent activity by the account holders. 3. If you speak to me about money tonight, I will speak to your guests about the truth. I read the lines over and over until I had memorized the cadence. I needed to be able to say them without my voice shaking. I needed to be able to say them while looking my father in the eye. I went to the closet and pulled out my dress. It was a midnight blue silk gown. Simple, elegant, and cut with a precision that screamed executive rather than debutante. I put it on. I pinned my hair back tight. I applied my makeup with the steady hand of a surgeon preparing for an operation. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. I didn't look like the poor relative anymore. I looked like someone who could buy and sell the entire room. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Brent. Hey, sis, where are you? Dad is getting nervous. We have a special surprise for you later. Hurry up. A special surprise? I almost laughed. The surprise was a pen and a contract waiting in a back room. I picked up the manila folder. I felt the weight of the paper inside. It was heavy, dense with facts that could not be cried away or shouted down. I slipped the folder into my oversized designer clutch, the one luxury item I had bought myself to celebrate my promotion. It fit perfectly. I looked at the room one last time to make sure I hadn't left anything behind. The view from the window was still beautiful, but it no longer looked like a city. It looked like a courtroom. They did not invite me to a party, I whispered, the realization finally solidifying into a weapon I could hold. They invited me to sign my own death warrant. They want to kill my future to keep their past alive on life support for 1 more week. I turned off the light. Let's go see who dies first. I walked out of the room, the door clicking shut behind me with the finality of a gavel. The double doors of the grand ballroom at the St. Maro Plaza swung open, and the atmosphere hit me like a physical wall. It was a dense, suffocating mixture of expensive perfume, the sharp tang of chilled champagne, and the heavy, humid weight of judgment. I stepped across the threshold, my heels clicking softly on the polished marble. I had mentally prepared myself for a party, but this was not a party. It was a coronation. The room was vast, capable of holding 500 people, and it was packed to capacity. Overhead, 3 massive crystal chandeliers hung like frozen explosions, casting a relentless diamond-bright light that left no shadow unexposed. The dress code on the invitation had been black tie and diamonds, and the guests had obeyed with aggressive enthusiasm. Everywhere I looked, I saw sequins, velvet, and enough jewelry to fund a small country. The women wore gowns that shouted their price tags, voluminous skirts, plunging necklines, fabrics that shimmered with gold and silver threads. The men were in tuxedos that fit too perfectly, their wrists weighed down by watches that cost more than my first car. And then there was me. I was wearing my midnight blue silk gown. It was a designer piece, tailored to a fraction of an inch, elegant in its severe simplicity. In a boardroom in New York or a gala in Chicago, it would have been considered chic and powerful. Here, in this carnival of Southern excess, it looked stark, it looked plain, it looked, to their eyes, like I couldn't afford anything better. I felt the gazes land on me instantly. It is a specific feeling, being scanned by people who measure worth in carats and thread counts. I saw heads turn. I saw whispers behind fan-shaped napkins. I saw eyes dart from my face to my dress, then down to my shoes, calculating my net worth and finding it wanting. I kept my chin high. clutching my oversized leather envelope bag against my side. Inside that bag rested the paper trail of their demise. But they didn't know that yet. To them, I was just Megan, the poor relation who had finally crawled back for a free meal. Oh, she actually came. The voice cut through the low hum of conversation like a glass shattering. I turned to see Elaine standing near a fountain made of ice that was slowly melting into a bed of oysters. Elaine was wearing a dress that could only be described as a cry for attention. It was crimson, covered in sequins, with a train that required its own zip code. She held a flute of champagne in one hand, and was flanked by two women I vaguely recognized as the wives of my father's golf partners. She marched toward me, her heels clacking loudly, ensuring that every eye in the vicinity was drawn to our reunion. "Megan!" she announced, her voice pitched to reach the back rows. "I told Calvin you probably wouldn't make it. We know how tight things are for you up there in the frozen north." She reached me and leaned in for a hug that involved no contact whatsoever, just air and the overwhelming scent of gardenia. She pulled back, keeping her hands on my shoulders, holding me in place like a specimen she was presenting to a class. "Look at you," she said, her smile fixed and terrifying. "So sensible. That dress is very practical. Honey, did you find it at an outlet? It is smart to save money where you can." The two women behind her tittered softly. I felt the heat rise in my neck, but I forced my expression to remain cool and impassive. "Hello, Elaine," I said, my voice steady. "The dress is vintage, and I'm doing quite well, thank you." "Of course you are," she said, patting my cheek with a condescension that made my skin crawl. "We are just so glad you could scrape together the airfare. I told Calvin, send her a ticket, for heaven's sake, but he said you have your pride, and we respect that, even if it makes things harder for you." She was doing it already, before I had even taken a sip of water. She was painting the picture, poor Megan, proud, struggling Megan. We try to help, but she refuses. "There is my girl." My father's voice boomed from the center of the room. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, and Calvin Hartley strode toward me. He looked exactly as he had in the photos. Tan, silver-haired, projecting an aura of robust health and infinite wealth. He was wearing a tuxedo with a velvet lapel and a bow tie that looked a little too tight. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't ask how I was. He grabbed me in a bear hug, pulling me against his chest so hard I could smell the scotch on his breath and the nervous sweat beneath his expensive cologne. "Everyone, look!" he shouted, keeping his arm draped heavily around my shoulders. "My daughter, Megan, home from Minneapolis. The prodigal daughter returns to the fold." There was a ripple of polite applause. I felt like a prop, a cardboard cutout brought out to complete the set design. "Hello, Dad," I said, trying to step out of his grip, but his fingers dug into my bare shoulder. "We missed you, sweetheart," he said, loud enough for the reporters standing by the bar to hear. "I know you have been trying to find your own way, and we are so proud of your independence. But remember, the doors of Hartley Meridian are always open. You don't have to struggle alone out there." It was masterful. In 3 sentences, he had reduced my career, my directorship, my team of analysts, my reputation, to a struggle, and positioned himself as the benevolent patriarch waiting to save me. "I am not struggling, Dad," I said, looking him directly in the eyes. He laughed, a booming, dismissive sound. "That is the Hartley spirit. Never admit defeat. I love it." Speaking of defeat, a lazy, drawling voice came from my left. "Did you fly budget, Megan? You look a little rumpled. Or is that just the best they have at the thrift stores in Minneapolis?" Brent materialized from the crowd, holding a whiskey glass that was already half empty. He was wearing a white dinner jacket that made him look like a waiter at a theme park. His face was flushed, his eyes glassy. "Hello, Brent," I said. "I see the investment in Miami went well." He blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing his face, but he recovered quickly. "Always hustling, sis. Unlike some people who count pennies. Seriously, though, did you walk here? You look like you just came from a funeral. A group of young men standing near him, his entourage of sycophants, laughed loudly. One of them nudged Brent. "Is this the sister? The one you told us about?" "That is her," Brent grinned. "The family charity case? Be nice, guys. She is sensitive about her bank account." The laughter grew louder. I stood there, surrounded by the 3 people who were supposed to be my family, while they dismantled my dignity for sport. But this time, I didn't look down at my shoes. I didn't stammer. I didn't feel the tears prickling my eyes. Instead, I looked past them. I activated the part of my brain that I used for due diligence. I scanned the room, cataloging the guests. I saw a man with a notepad standing near a pillar, the business editor for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I saw 2 men in gray suits talking in the corner, looking bored and dangerous, senior partners from the regional bank that held the mortgage on the Hartley commercial properties. I saw a woman in a red blazer checking her watch impatiently. She was a representative from the Chamber of Commerce. And then I saw the layout. There was a large screen behind the main stage. There was a podium. There were blown-up photos of my father shaking hands with the mayor, with the governor, with various local celebrities. But there were no photos of the projects, no renderings of the new developments they were supposedly celebrating, no architectural models. It was all smoke. I realized then why they needed me. They didn't just need my money. They needed my presence to complete the illusion of stability. A man whose family is intact, whose daughter flies across the country to honor him, looks reliable. A man whose children are estranged looks risky. They were using me as collateral for their reputation. I was the human equivalent of a fresh coat of paint on a crumbling building. "Come on, Megan," Calvin said, tightening his grip on my shoulder. "I want to introduce you to Mr. Henderson. He is a major investor, and I told him all about how you are, trying to get into the finance world. He might have an internship or an entry-level spot for you if you ask nicely." The insult was so casual, so breathtakingly audacious, that I almost admired it. He was introducing me, a director of strategic analytics, as someone looking for an internship. He was actively erasing my success to keep me in the box labeled failure. If I corrected him now, in front of everyone, I would look petty. I would look like the hysterical daughter causing a scene. He knew that. He was banking on my politeness. He was banking on the fact that I had spent 33 years trying to please him. He began to steer me toward the VIP table near the stage. The crowd parted for us. I could feel their eyes. I could hear their thoughts. There is the poor daughter. Look how kind Calvin is to her. Look how patient Elaine is. I walked with him. I let him lead me. I let Brent snicker behind my back. I let Elaine smooth the back of my dress with a patronizing pat. But as we walked, my hand tightened around the leather clutch at my side. I could feel the sharp corner of the manila folder through the soft leather. They thought they were leading a sheep to the slaughter. They didn't realize they were dragging a wolf into the fold. "Smile, honey," Elaine hissed in my ear as we approached the photographers. "Try to look like you belong here." I stopped. I turned to her. For the first time all night, I allowed a genuine smile to touch my lips. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of an auditor who has just found the smoking gun in the ledger. "Oh, I belong here, Elaine," I said, my voice low and smooth. "More than you know." I turned back to the front. We reached the table. My father pulled out a chair for me, placing me right next to him, facing the crowd. It was the seat of honor, the seat of the dutiful daughter. I sat down. I placed my clutch on the table, right next to the floral centerpiece. I rested my hand on top of it. Let them have their show, I thought, watching the waiter pour champagne into my father's glass. Let them build the stage. Let them turn on the spotlights. Let them gather the audience. Because when the curtain falls, I am the one who is going to be holding the remote control. I took a sip of water. It was cold. It tasted like clarity. "If you want a performance," I whispered to myself, "I will give you the performance of a lifetime, but the script has changed." I watched my father stand up and tap his spoon against his glass. The room went silent. The show was about to begin. and I was ready to burn the theater down. The applause had barely died down when my father placed a heavy hand on the small of my back. It was not a gesture of affection, it was a steerage maneuver, firm and insistent, guiding me away from the table where the champagne was still bubbling in the flutes. "Let's go to the energetic room for a moment. Sweetheart," he said, his voice dropping to a register that was meant to sound conspiratorial, but just sounded tense. "Just family. We have some paperwork to clear up for the trust fund. You know how the lawyers are." I knew exactly how lawyers were. I had one on speed dial who was currently monitoring a cloud server for my signal. "Of course," I said, allowing him to guide me. Elaine and Brent flanked us, forming a human phalanx that prevented any guests from intercepting us. We moved through the crowd, past the ice sculpture, past the string quartet playing Mozart, and toward a heavy oak door at the rear of the ballroom. My father swiped a keycard. The lock clicked with a sound like a pistol hammer being cocked. He pushed the door open, and we stepped inside. The silence was instant and jarring. The room was a small executive conference suite, paneled in dark wood, smelling of lemon polish and stale cigars. In the center of the room sat a mahogany table. On that table, sitting alone under the glare of a pendant light, was a thick blue folder. It looked innocent enough, but to me, it looked like a bear trap. "Have a seat, Megan," Elaine said. She didn't sit. She stood by the door, crossing her arms, effectively blocking the exit. I sat. I placed my clutch on the table. My heart was hammering against my ribs, jarring and hard, but I kept my face smooth. I had practiced this face in 1,000 board meetings where millions of dollars were at stake. "What is this?" I asked, nodding at the folder. "Just some housekeeping," Calvin said, pulling out a fountain pen. He unscrewed the cap with slow, deliberate movements. "Since you are back, we wanted to make sure you were properly included in the family's future projects. We are restructuring Hartley Meridian, expanding, and we want you to be a part of it." He slid the folder toward me. I opened it. The document wasn't a trust fund update. It was a capital injection and unsecured lending agreement. I scanned the pages, my eyes latching onto the key clauses with the speed of a forensic accountant. Clause 4.1. The lender, Megan Hartley, agrees to provide immediate liquid capital to the borrower, Hartley Meridian Holdings. Clause 5.3. Repayment is contingent upon the successful completion of the Phase 3 development project. Clause 6.0. In the event of insolvency or project cancellation, this loan shall be considered a non-recourse contribution and shall not be subject to repayment. I looked at the line where the amount was supposed to be. It was blank. A long, empty underline waiting for a number. "You want me to invest," I said, keeping my voice flat. "We want you to partner with us," Calvin corrected, leaning forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. "We have a cash flow gap, a tiny hiccup. The banks are slow. You know how they are with paperwork. We just need a bridge, $200,000, just until the end of the quarter." $200,000, the exact amount of the predatory loan from Vulture Capital, the exact amount that was due on Monday. "And if I sign this," I said, tapping Clause 6.0, "and the project fails, I get nothing back, no equity, no voting rights, no collateral." "It won't fail," Brent snapped. He was pacing by the window, agitated. "God, you are always so negative. This is a sure thing. Dad has the city council in his pocket." "If it is a sure thing," I asked, looking at Brent, "why aren't you putting up the money?" "Because my money is tied up," Brent shot back, his face flushing. "In assets. You wouldn't understand. You just hoard cash in a savings account like a squirrel." I looked back at the document. It was a masterpiece of legal theft. If I signed this, I was essentially handing them my life savings as a gift, with zero legal recourse to ever see a dime of it again. I reached into my bag, ostensibly to find a tissue. My hand brushed my phone. I pressed the side button 3 times, a shortcut I had set up earlier. The voice recorder app activated silently in the background. "Dad," I said, looking up at him, "this isn't an investment. This is a donation. You are asking me to cover a debt." Calvin's face hardened. The benevolent patriarch mask slipped, revealing the desperate, frightened man beneath. "It is family. Megan," he said, his voice lowering into a growl. "It is the legacy. Do you want to see everything I built fall apart over a paperwork delay? I raised you. I put a roof over your head. Is this how you repay me? By reading the fine print like I am some stranger trying to scam you?" "I am reading the fine print because this document says I have no rights," I countered. "You have the right to be a Hartley," Elaine interjected, her voice sharp and piercing. She stepped away from the door, looming over me. "Do you know who is out there? Megan? The mayor? The heads of the chamber? If word gets out that Calvin Hartley's own daughter wouldn't support the company, we are ruined. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to be the reason your father has a heart attack?" It was the classic guilt trip, the weaponization of duty. "I need time," I said. "I can't sign this tonight. I need my lawyer to review the terms." "We don't have time for lawyers," Brent shouted. The room went dead silent. Brent froze, realizing he had said too much. I looked at him. "Why don't we have time, Brent?" Calvin slammed his hand on the table, making the heavy folder jump. "Because the opportunity expires on Monday morning. It is a time-sensitive deal. If the funds aren't in the escrow account by 9 o'clock Monday, we lose the contract." He was lying. They wouldn't lose a contract. They would lose the company to the repo men. "Monday," I repeated. "That is 48 hours. "Exactly," Calvin said, pushing the pen toward me again. "So just sign it. Write the check. We will deposit it Monday morning. You will get it back with interest in 6 months. I give you my word." His word, the word of a man who had borrowed $1,500 for a roof and spent it on a country club membership. I looked down at the paper. I pulled out my phone, holding it openly now. "What are you doing?" Elaine demanded. "Taking a picture of the terms," I lied smoothly. "For my records." I snapped 3 photos. Then, under the table, I thumbed out a text to Tess. "Start saving, code red." "I am not signing this tonight," I said, putting the phone down. "I am not writing a check for $200,000 based on a verbal promise in a hotel back room." Calvin's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He stood up straight, looming over me. "You ungrateful little brat. You think you are better than us because you went north and got some desk job? You are nothing without this name. You are a nobody." "I am a nobody with $200,000, I said calmly. "And you are a somebody with 0. The insult hung in the air, vibrating with tension. Brent looked like he wanted to hit me. Calvin looked like he wanted to cry. But Elaine looked dangerous. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the handle. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "If you won't do it for family, maybe you will do it for shame." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I already knew. "I am going to open this door," Elaine said. "And I am going to tell everyone out there, the press, the investors, our friends, that you are refusing to help save your father's legacy because you are greedy. I will tell them you demanded a controlling share. I will tell them you are holding us hostage." "You wouldn't," I said, feigning fear. "Try me," she hissed. "I will paint you as the villain of this story so fast your head will spin. You will be the jealous daughter who tried to sabotage the anniversary. You will be a pariah in this town. Or you can sign the paper, smile, and go back out there as the hero." She cracked the door open. The sound of the party rushed in. Laughter, clinking glasses, music. It was the sound of the audience she was threatening to unleash on me. "Last chance. Megan," Calvin said, shoving the pen into my hand. "Sign it. Don't make a scene." "You have got nothing to lose," Brent sneered, leaning into my face. "You live alone. You die alone. At least be useful." I looked at the pen. I looked at the blank line. I looked at the open door where the light from the chandeliers was spilling onto the carpet. They thought the crowd was their weapon. They thought public opinion was their shield. They had no idea that I had brought my own ammunition, and it was far more explosive than a rumor. I stood up. I didn't pick up the pen. I picked up my clutch. "You want to involve the guests?" I asked, my voice rising just enough to carry through the crack in the door. "You want to make this public?" "Sign the paper," Elaine screeched, pulling the door wider, ready to call for attention. I walked toward her. I didn't stop. "Okay," I said. "Let's go tell them, but we aren't going to tell them your version." I pushed past Elaine, forcing the door fully open. The bright light of the ballroom hit me. I walked straight out of the dark, suffocating room and back onto the stage they had set for me. Behind me, I heard Calvin scramble to grab the folder. "Megan, get back here!" But it was too late. I was already moving toward the microphone stand at the front of the room. The timer on their bomb had just hit 0, but I wasn't the one who was going to explode. The distance from the oak door of the private room to the center of the ballroom was less than 50 feet, but as I walked it, the space felt like a minefield detonating one step at a time. Elaine had moved faster than I anticipated. She did not run. That would have been undignified, but she moved with the frantic energy of a woman whose social survival depended on striking the first blow. She reached the edge of the dance floor just as the string quartet finished a polite minuet. "Stop the music!" she cried out. Her voice wasn't a scream. It was a broken, trembling wail that cut through the chatter like a knife. "Please, just stop." The musicians froze, bows hovering over strings. The room fell into a confused hush. 500 faces turned toward her. Elaine stood there, one hand clutching her chest, the other covering her mouth as if she were holding back a torrent of grief. She looked small, fragile, and utterly devastated. It was a performance that deserved a standing ovation. "I am so sorry to ruin the evening," she sobbed, tears already streaming down her cheeks. She must have summoned them the moment she stepped out of the back room. "But I don't think we can continue. Our hearts are just broken." A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd. "What is it?" someone asked from the front row. "Is it Calvin?" Elaine shook her head, pointing a trembling finger at me. I was standing near the buffet table, clutching my bag, freezing in the spotlight of her accusation. "It is Megan," she choked out. We tried so hard to welcome her back. We wanted this night to be about family, about healing, but she—" Elaine let out a gasp that sounded like a dying bird. "She just told us she hopes we lose everything. She refused to help her father save the company. She laughed at us." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, judgmental, and cold. "She said she would rather see her father on the street than lift a finger to help," Elaine continued, her voice gaining strength from the audience's shock. "After everything Calvin did for her, after he paid for her school, after he sent her money when she was struggling in Minneapolis, this is how she repays him, with hatred." I watched the faces of the guests. In a matter of seconds, their expressions shifted from curiosity to disgust. They looked at my designer dress and saw vanity. They looked at my stoic expression and saw coldness. They looked at my solitary stance and saw arrogance. The whispers started. They were like the buzzing of angry wasps. "Can you believe it? Ungrateful child. Look at her, standing there like she owns the place. Calvin must be heartbroken." I looked for my father. He was standing near the stage, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped in a pose of utter defeat. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His silence was the loudest indictment in the room. By saying nothing, he was confirming everything. He was the noble, suffering patriarch, too proud to complain, letting his wife defend his honor. It was the clean hands strategy I had seen corporate CEOs use a dozen times to bury a whistleblower. Brent was standing next to him, sipping his drink. He wasn't looking at the floor. He was looking right at me, and he was smirking. It was a small, nasty curl of the lip that said, "I told you so. You are the villain now." A woman in a silver gown, someone I recognized as a prominent local charity organizer, stepped into my path as I tried to move. She placed a hand on my arm, not to comfort, but to restrain. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she hissed, her face inches from mine. Your father is a good man. He has given so much to this city. How can you be so selfish?" "You don't know the whole story," I said, my voice calm but tight. "I know enough," she snapped, pulling her hand away as if I were contagious. "I know that family helps family. Clearly. You forgot where you came from." I looked around. I was surrounded. The judgment was physical. A wall of bodies and glares closing in on me. They were rewriting my history in real time. In their version. I was the leech. The failure who had returned only to twist the knife. If I walked out now, which was exactly what Elaine wanted me to do, that version would become the truth. I would be the pariah of Savannah forever. My reputation would be torched, and my father would likely use the sympathy to secure a loan from one of these very guests. "Poor Calvin," they would say. "Let me write you a check. You shouldn't have to suffer because of that awful daughter." He would win. He would get the money, keep the company, and I would be the scapegoat. No. I felt a switch flip inside me. It was the same switch that flipped when I found a discrepancy in a financial audit. I didn't feel hurt anymore. I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt clinical. I felt precise. I gripped my clutch tighter. The evidence was in there. The truth wasn't a feeling. It was data. And data did not care about tears. I didn't run for the exit. I turned and walked straight toward the stage. The crowd parted, but not out of respect this time. They moved away to avoid touching me. I walked past the ice sculpture. I walked past Elaine, who was still sobbing into a handkerchief. Her eyes widened slightly as she saw me heading for the microphone, a flash of genuine panic breaking through her performance. "Don't let her speak!" Elaine shrieked, dropping the grieving mother act for a split second. "She is just going to lie. She is unstable." But it was too late. I was already on the stairs. Calvin looked up, his eyes narrowing. He took a half step toward me, as if to block my path. But he stopped. He couldn't physically restrain me without breaking his character of the gentle, aggrieved father. He had trapped himself in his own role. I reached the podium. The microphone was live. I could hear the hum of the speakers. I looked out at the sea of 500 faces. They were hostile. They were angry. They were waiting for me to break down, to scream, to give them a reason to throw me out. I didn't give them the satisfaction. I placed my clutch on the podium. I unzipped it. The sound was amplified by the mic, a sharp, metallic zip that echoed through the silent ballroom. "Elaine is right about one thing," I said. My voice was steady, low, and clear. I didn't shout. I spoke with the authority of a woman who is used to commanding a boardroom. I did refuse to give my father the money he asked for tonight. A gasp went through the room. I had confessed. Elaine looked triumphant. "But she left out the part about why," I continued, my eyes scanning the front row where the bankers and investors sat. "And she left out the part about who has actually been funding this family for the last 8 years. "Get her off the stage," Brent yelled from the side, his smirk gone. "She is drunk. Cut the mic." The sound technician, a young guy in a black t-shirt who looked confused, reached for the board. I pointed at him. It was a sharp, direct gesture. "If you cut this mic, you are complicit in fraud. Leave it on." The technician froze, his hand hovering over the mute button. He didn't touch it. I turned back to the crowd. "You have been told a story tonight," I said. "A story about a poor, struggling daughter and a wealthy, benevolent father. It is a good story. It pulls at the heartstrings. But I am an analyst. I don't deal in stories. I deal in receipts." I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. I opened it. I grabbed the HDMI cable that was resting on the podium, left there for the slideshow of family memories that they had planned to show later. I plugged it in. "You all think I am the villain," I said, typing in my password. "That is fine. You can hate me. You can judge me. You can never speak to me again." I hit the enter key. "But give me 5 minutes," I said, looking directly at my father, who was now pale and starting to sweat. "Just 5 minutes, and after you see what I have to show you, you can hate me if you want, but make sure you are hating the right person." Behind me, The massive projection screen that spanned 20 feet flickered to life. It didn't show a photo of me as a baby. It didn't show a family picnic. It showed a spreadsheet. The header was in bold, black letters. Hartley Family Financial Aid and Extracted Capital, 2017 to 2025. And below it, the first column began to populate with dates and numbers, scrolling down like the credits of a movie that was about to turn into a horror film for Calvin Hartley. The room went so quiet that I could hear the ice melting in the sculpture 10 yards away. "Let's begin with the roof," I said. "Let's look at the data," I said, my voice echoing slightly off the high ceilings. I pressed the arrow key on my laptop. On the massive screen behind me, a bank statement appeared. It was magnified so clearly that even the people in the back row could read the transaction ID. "Exhibit A," I announced, stepping to the side so the projection light wouldn't wash me out. "Dated August 14th of this year. A wire transfer of $3,000 from my personal savings account to the joint checking account of Calvin and Elaine Hartley." I paused, letting the number sink in. "The request was urgent," I explained, looking directly at the woman who had called me selfish moments ago. Elaine called me in tears. She said a storm had destroyed the roof over the master bedroom. She said water was pouring onto the floors. She said they had no liquidity because it was all tied up in big deals. She begged me to help save the family home. I pressed the key again. The image split. On the left remained the bank transfer. On the right, a screenshot from Instagram appeared. It was the photo Elaine had posted on August 16th, 2 days after the wire transfer. The image was sharp. It showed Elaine posing in front of a mirror in a boutique, holding the limited edition handbag. The caption was highlighted in yellow. "Retail therapy is the best medicine. Treating myself because I deserve it." "The retail price of that bag is $2,800, I noted dryly, curiously close to the cost of the emergency roof repair. And if you look at the background of the photo, you will notice the weather in the reflection of the window. It is perfectly sunny. There was no storm damage recorded in Savannah that week. I checked the meteorological reports." A murmur rippled through the room. It wasn't the angry buzz from before. It was the sound of confusion shifting into suspicion. "But surely," I said, turning to look at Brent, who was standing frozen near the bar. "A brother wouldn't lie." Click. A new slide, a text message thread. "May 4th, I read. "Brent Hartley sends a text. Sis, I need $4,000 for a pre-IPO buy-in. Guaranteed returns. I am desperate. Help me out." Click. "May 5th. I transfer $1,500. It was all I could spare at the moment." Click. "May 7th. A video posted to Brent's public TikTok account. The video didn't play, but the screenshot was frozen on a frame of Brent holding a bottle of Grey Goose in a VIP booth in Miami, surrounded by sparklers. The timestamp was clearly visible. $1,500 doesn't buy a lot of stock," I said, my voice cutting like a razor. "But it buys a very nice table at Club E11 even in Miami." The crowd was turning. I could feel it. The physical wall of judgment that had been pressing against me was beginning to crack. People were pulling out their phones, not to record me, but to zoom in on the screen. "These are just numbers," I said. "Let's talk about the relationship." I pulled up a graph. It was a simple bar chart. One side was a towering green column. The other was a barely visible red sliver. "This is a log of phone calls over the last 5 years, I interpreted. The green represents calls initiated by me, checking on their health, wishing them happy birthday, asking about their lives. The red represents calls initiated by them." I pointed to the tiny red sliver. "There are exactly 6 calls in red," I said. "I have transcribed the first 30 seconds of each one." Text appeared next to the graph. Call 1. "Megan, we need help with the car payment." Call 2. "Megan, the dog needs surgery." Call 3. "Megan, Dad is short on cash for the club dues." "They didn't call to hear my voice," I said, looking at my father. He was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open, his face draining of color. "They called to hear the sound of an ATM dispensing cash. I wasn't a daughter, I was a credit line." Elaine let out a strangled noise, something between a sob and a scream. "Stop it! She is lying! These are doctored!" "Digital forensics are hard to doctor, Elaine," I replied without looking at her. "But let's move on to why we are really here tonight. The legacy, the celebration." I took a deep breath. This was the point of no return. The personal jabs were embarrassing, but what came next was professional ruin. "My friend Tess Morgan is a corporate compliance lawyer," I said. "She did a little digging into the public records of Hartley Meridian Holdings, records that are available to anyone who knows where to look." Click. The screen turned white with the stark, brutal imagery of a court filing. "This is a lawsuit filed by Apex Concrete Solutions," I read. "Filed 45 days ago, case number CV2024. Defendant, Calvin Hartley. Claim, breach of contract for non-payment of $42,000. I saw a man in the second row, a man wearing a pin that identified him as a local developer, lean forward sharply, squinting at the screen. Click. "This is a mechanic's lien placed on the Hartley residence," I continued. $14,000 owed to Greenscape Design. The very house you are standing in right now is technically compromised." The murmurs grew louder. They were becoming gasps. The guests were looking at each other, realizing that the champagne they were drinking had likely been bought on credit that would never be repaid. "But here's the headline," I said. "The reason for this party, the reason for the invitation that suddenly arrived after a year of silence." Click. The document from Vulture Capital Partners filled the 20-foot screen. The interest rate of 18% seemed to glow neon red. "A bridge loan," I narrated, my voice cold and precise. "Principal, $200,000. Maturity date, next Monday. That is 48 hours from now. Collateral, controlling interest in Hartley Meridian Holdings." The room went dead silent, the kind of silence that happens when a bomb is discovered under the table. "If Calvin Hartley does not pay $200,000 by Monday morning," I said, looking directly at the investors in the front row, "he ceases to own his company. He ceases to own the legacy he is celebrating tonight." I unplugged the HDMI cable for a second, then plugged in my phone. The screen shifted to the photo I had taken under the table just 10 minutes ago. It was the capital injection agreement with the blank line. 10 minutes ago," I said, pointing to the screen, "my father and stepmother pulled me into the back room. They presented me with this. They called it an investment opportunity. Look at Clause 6. I zoomed in on the phone screen. Non-recourse contribution. No repayment in event of insolvency. "They didn't want me to invest," I said. "They wanted me to pay off the Vulture Capital loan. They knew the company was collapsing. They wanted to take my life savings, money I earned working 80-hour weeks, to plug the hole in their sinking ship for a few more months, and they wrote the contract so that when the ship inevitably sank, I would go down with it while they floated away on my life raft." I looked up from the podium. "They brought me here to fleece me," I said, "and when I refused to sign, Elaine ran out here and told you I was the one abandoning them." I stepped back from the mic. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The cognitive dissonance was too strong. They had come to celebrate a titan of industry, and they were looking at a con artist. Then, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. It was Mr. Henderson, the major investor my father had tried to impress. He was a large man with a face like carved granite. He walked right up to the edge of the stage, ignoring me, and looked straight at Calvin. "Calvin," Mr. Henderson said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. "Is that loan document real? Does Vulture Capital hold a lien on your equity?" Calvin Hartley, the man who had always had a joke, a handshake, and a drink for everyone, looked like he was shrinking inside his tuxedo. Sweat was glistening visibly on his forehead. "Now, Bill," Calvin stammered, holding up his hands, It is a misunderstanding. Standard leverage. We are restructuring. The girl, she doesn't understand high finance. She is confused." "I read court filings for a living, Calvin," Mr. Henderson said, his voice dropping an octave. "That is a foreclosure notice. You asked me for $500,000 last week for a new wing. Were you going to use my money to pay off a loan shark? No, Bill, please, Calvin choked out, taking a step toward him. It is temporary. I have the city council deal. There is no city council deal, I interjected from the stage. I checked the municipal meeting minutes. The project was rejected 3 months ago. That was the final blow. Calvin flinched as if I had hit him. He looked around the room, wild-eyed. He saw the disgust on his friends' faces. He saw the bankers pulling out their phones to call their risk departments. He saw his world dissolving. You? Calvin pointed a shaking finger at me. You ruined it. You ruined everything. He lunged forward, losing all control, screaming like a man possessing nothing but rage. Brent had to grab his arm to hold him back, looking terrified. Suddenly, there was a blur of crimson motion from the side. Elaine. She wasn't looking at Calvin. She was looking at the laptop. She rushed up the stairs, her heels clattering, her face twisted into a mask of pure feral hatred. She wasn't crying anymore. She was attacking. Shut it off, she shrieked, clawing at the podium, reaching for the microphone. Shut it off, you witch, you jealous, miserable little witch. She grabbed the stem of the microphone, trying to wrench it away from me. I didn't flinch. I didn't let go. I held the mic stand firmly with one hand and caught her wrist with the other. My grip was iron. Let go, she screamed, thrashing, her sequins scratching against the wood. Don't listen to her. She is lying. She is crazy. I leaned into the mic, my voice calm, amplified, over her screeching. I wouldn't touch that laptop if I were you, Elaine, I said. She froze, breathing heavily, her eyes wide and manic. Why? She hissed. What else do you have? I looked at her. Then I looked at the crowd. Then I looked back at the screen where the cursor was hovering over a final file. I have the audio, I said. I recorded the conversation in the back room, but that is not what I'm talking about. I paused for effect. I have one more document, I said softly. And this one isn't a bank statement. It doesn't show where the money went. It shows where the money came from, and it doesn't involve Dad. Elaine went still. Her hand went limp in my grip. The color drained from her face so completely that her rouge stood out like clown paint. You wouldn't, she whispered. Try me, I said. Elaine stood frozen, her hand still gripping the microphone stand, her face a mask of crumbling plaster. She had expected me to produce a scandalous photo, perhaps an affair, or maybe a secret bank account of my own. She was braced for a social attack. She was not braced for a corporate audit. I turned back to the laptop. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. You all think I brought this document to show you how much money I make, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room where the waiters had stopped serving to watch the train wreck. You think I am here to brag, to say, look at me, I am the rich one now. I clicked the file. A document appeared on the screen. It was indeed a salary slip. It was my most recent pay stub from Northbridge Ledger Group, showing my new title as Director of Strategic Analytics and a gross monthly income that made the audience audibly inhale. It was a number that put me comfortably in the top 1% of earners in the state. That is a lot of money, I noted, looking at Brent. Certainly enough to fix a roof or pay off a loan shark. So you admit it, Brent shouted, trying to find footing on the slippery ground of his own making. You have been holding out on us. You let us suffer while you were sitting on a gold mine. I shook my head slowly. Look at the date on the document, I said. I pointed to the top right corner of the projected image. October 15th, I read. That is the day I received this slip. I have not mailed it to anyone. I have not emailed it. I have not posted it. I clicked again. The image zoomed out. The salary slip was now an attachment in an email window. So why? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Is this an image of an email sent from Calvin Hartley to Brent Hartley on October 17th? The silence in the room changed frequency. It went from shocked to horrified. They didn't ask me for money because they thought I could scrape it together, I said, looking at the investors in the front row. They asked me for money because they hacked my digital correspondence. They have been monitoring my financial growth for years. They knew exactly how much I made. They knew exactly when my promotion bonus hit my account. I turned to my father. He was leaning against the table, breathing hard, his hand clutching his chest. "The joke about the poor relative?" I asked him. "That wasn't a joke. That was a strategy. You knew if you acknowledged my success, you would have to treat me with respect. But if you kept treating me like a failure, I would keep trying to buy your approval. You weren't mocking me because I was poor. You were mocking me to keep me insecure. You wanted the golden goose to think it was an ugly duckling so it wouldn't fly away." "That is illegal," a voice said from the crowd. It was Tess. She had walked in from the lobby, phone in hand. "Accessing private financial data without consent is a federal crime." "We didn't hack anything," Elaine shrieked, her voice cracking. We just heard rumors." "I have the IP logs." "Elaine," I said, cutting her off. "But let's talk about the strategy, because it wasn't just about watching, it was about trapping." I clicked to the next slide. This was a text message thread, but it wasn't from my phone. It was a thread recovered from a former executive assistant of my father's, a woman named Sarah, who had been fired 6 months ago when checks started bouncing. Sarah had been very happy to share her archives with Tess. The sender was Elaine. The recipient was Sarah. Date, September 3rd. "Elaine, we need to get Megan down here for the anniversary. The Vulture loan is due. If we get her in a room, she will hesitate, but if we pressure her in front of the mayor and the Hendersons, she will fold. She is weak when she is embarrassed. Book the flight, but make it economy so she feels small." The crowd gasped. It was a collective, sharp intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. "She is weak when she is embarrassed," I repeated, reading the words on the screen. I looked at Elaine, who was now trembling so violently that her sequins shimmered like a dying fish. "That was your bet, wasn't it, Elaine? That if you stripped me of my dignity, I would sign away my future just to make the hurting stop." I walked around the podium, stepping closer to the edge of the stage. "And Brent," I said, "let's not forget you." I brought up the final document in this sequence. It was a security alert from a credit monitoring agency. Alert. Unauthorized inquiry. Attempt to open a quick cash credit line using the Social Security number ending in 4582. Location of inquiry. 192 Magnolia Lane, Savannah, Georgia. 192 Magnolia Lane, I said. "That is this house. That is Brent's bedroom. You didn't just want my money. Brent, you tried to steal my identity to get a $10,000 line of credit 3 months ago. The system blocked it because I have a fraud alert set up. I didn't press charges then because I thought it was a mistake. I thought, surely, my brother wouldn't do that." I looked at him. He looked like a child caught stealing from the collection plate. "I was wrong," I said. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor began. It started with Mr. Henderson. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and turned to his wife. "We are leaving." It was the signal the room had been waiting for. "I can't be seen here," the woman from the Chamber of Commerce muttered, grabbing her purse. "This is a PR nightmare." "Fraud," the banker whispered to his colleague. "We need to freeze their accounts immediately, tonight." The reporters, however, were not leaving. They were typing furiously on their phones. The flash of a camera went off, then another, then a barrage of them. Calvin Hartley was no longer the king of Savannah. He was a man standing in the wreckage of his own greed, illuminated by the strobe lights of his public destruction. He looked at the departing guests. He looked at the investors walking out the door without looking back. He looked at the bankers making urgent calls. Then he looked at me. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked broken, but it was a dangerous, cornered kind of broken. He stumbled toward me. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly weak. He pulled me away from the microphone, toward the side of the stage, into the shadows of the heavy velvet curtains. "Megan," he rasped. His eyes were bloodshot. "Megan, stop, please. You have made your point. You killed the company. It is dead. Are you happy?" "I didn't kill it," Dad, I said, pulling my arm away. I just performed the autopsy. What do you want? He hissed, glancing at the reporters who were trying to inch closer. You want a cut? Is that it? You want shares? I can give you shares. We can restructure. Just go back to the mic. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them it was a roast, a joke. I stared at him, even now, standing in the ashes. He was trying to negotiate a deal. I don't want shares in a bankrupt company, I said. Then what? He begged. Money? I can get money. I have offshore accounts that Vulture doesn't know about. I can wire you $20,000 right now. I make $20,000 in a bad month, I said cold. I don't want your money. Elaine appeared at his elbow. She had abandoned the fainting act. Her face was streaked with mascara, making her look like a gargoyle. She wants to humiliate us, Calvin, she spat. She is enjoying this. Look at her face. She is sick. I want the truth, I said, looking at both of them. I want you to admit, right now, that I was never the poor relative. I want you to admit that you used me, and I want you to never, ever contact me again. Fine, Calvin said, waving his hands frantically. Fine. You were great. You were rich. You are the best. Now fix this. It is not about being rich, Dad, I said. It is about why you targeted me. Why me? Why not ask your rich friends? Why spend 8 years breaking me down just to build yourself up? Because you owed us, Elaine shouted. She couldn't help herself. The venom was too deep. After everything we went through with your mother, you owed us that money. Elaine, shut up, Calvin roared. He slammed his hand over her mouth, his eyes wide with panic. I froze. My mother had died when I was 4. A car accident. That was the story. Calvin had remarried Elaine a year later. I had always been told there was no insurance money, no inheritance, just debt that Calvin had heroically paid off. What did you say? I asked. The noise of the room faded away. Elaine pulled Calvin's hand down. She looked reckless. She looked like someone who realized the ship was sinking and decided to drill more holes. She deserves to know, Calvin, Elaine sneered. She thinks she is so smart with her spreadsheets. Let her see the real ledger. Elaine, I swear to God, Calvin warned, grabbing her shoulder. Let go of me, she screamed. She turned to me, her eyes gleaming with malice. You think you are self-made? You think that brain of yours is why you are rich? You are rich because your mother was the smart one. She left a policy. Megan, a massive one. There was no policy, I said, my heart starting to hammer a different rhythm. Dad said she died without a will. She had a will, Elaine laughed. It was a jagged, hysterical sound. She left everything to you, in a trust, to be accessed when you turned 25. I looked at Calvin. He was shaking his head, mumbling, no, 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 over and over again. Where is it? I asked. I turned 25 8 years ago. We spent it, Elaine yelled. Every dime. That is how Calvin started Meridian. That is how we bought this house. We forged the trustee's signature. We used your money to build this life. And then we convinced you that you were the poor one so you wouldn't go looking for it. The world tilted on its axis. The spreadsheet on the screen behind me, the $45,000 I had sent them, was nothing. It was pennies. They hadn't just borrowed from me. They had stolen my birthright. They had built their entire empire on the corpse of my mother's legacy, and then they had spent my entire adult life making me feel guilty for not giving them more. Calvin looked at me. The fight had gone out of him. He looked like a ghost. It was a bridge loan, he whispered, his voice trembling. I meant to pay it back. I always meant to put it back before you found out. The market turned. I needed more time. 1996, I said, the date flashing in my mind. The year the company was founded, 2 years after she died. It was $1 million, Calvin blurted out. The words seemed to vomit out of him, a confession forced by the crushing weight of the moment. $1.2 million. From her life insurance and the settlement with the trucking company, It was all yours. It was all supposed to be yours. I stood there. The guests who were still in the room had stopped moving. The reporters were recording every word. The revelation hung in the air, heavier than the chandeliers, sharper than the diamonds. I wasn't the poor relative. I was the financier. I was the foundation. I was the bank they had robbed, burned down, and then blamed for the ashes. "You didn't just steal my money," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. "You stole my life. You let me live in a studio apartment eating ramen while you bought boats with my mother's death benefit." "We raised you," Elaine screeched, desperate to reclaim the moral high ground that had long since crumbled. "We fed you. We clothed you." "With my own money," I shouted back. It was the first time I had raised my voice all night. "You fed me with my own money and told me I should be grateful for the charity." I looked at Calvin. He was weeping now, ugly, silent tears that ran down his tanned face. "I am sorry," he whispered. "Megan, I am so sorry." I looked at the salary slip on the screen. Then I looked at the manila folder in my hand. I realized I had one more document to create. I turned to the reporters. "You have your story," I said to them, "but the headline isn't bankruptcy." I looked back at my father. "The headline is grand larceny," I said, "and I am pressing charges." The silence in the St. Maro Plaza ballroom was no longer the silence of shock. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a courtroom after a guilty verdict has been read. The air felt thin, charged with the electricity of a dozen careers and reputations disintegrating in real time. My father, Calvin, stood near the edge of the stage. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, the bluff, the bravado, the carefully constructed persona of the Southern tycoon. It had all evaporated, leaving behind a terrified old man who had been caught robbing his own child. Elaine was leaning against a pillar, her face pale beneath the layers of makeup, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit that did not exist. But I was not done. I had peeled back the layers of fraud, but I needed to sever the emotional cord that had allowed them to manipulate me for 3 decades. I walked over to the table where they had tried to force me to sign the loan agreement. My father's lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, who had been hovering nervously by the curtain, stepped forward as if to intervene. I simply held up a hand, and he stopped. He knew better than to step in front of a moving train. I picked up the physical copy of my salary slip that I had pulled from my bag. I smoothed it out on the mahogany table. It lay there, a stark white rectangle against the dark wood, right next to their fraudulent contract. "For years," I said, my voice projecting clearly without the microphone, carrying to the silent crowd solely on the strength of my resolve. "You cast me as the failure. You told everyone I was the one who couldn't make it. You made me the poor relative joke at every dinner, every holiday, every gathering." I looked at Calvin. He couldn't meet my eyes. "You didn't do that because you thought it was true." I continued. "You did it because it was necessary. You needed me to feel small. You needed me to feel like I owed you. You knew that if I felt like the disappointment of the family, I would spend my entire life trying to buy my way back into your good graces. You created a deficit in my soul so that I would keep trying to fill it with checks." I placed a thick black binder on the table next to the salary slip. The cover was labeled "Termination of Relations." "I am not here to invest in your company," I said, my tone as cold and final as a closing bell. "And I am not here to save your reputation. I came here tonight for one reason only, to permanently revoke your access to my life." Elaine pushed herself off the pillar. She looked desperate, her survival instinct kicking in one last time. "Megan, please, we can talk about this. We can explain. The trust fund. We used it to build a future for all of us. You were included in the plan." "Included?" I laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. "You want to talk about the plan? Let's show them the plan." I turned back to the laptop one last time. This was the twist that would seal the coffin. This was the document Tess had found buried deep in a mislabeled folder on their server. The one thing that proved I wasn't just a victim of theft. but a victim of long-term calculation. I hit the key. The final image appeared on the 20-foot screen. It was a page from a confidential pitch deck titled Hartley Meridian, 10-Year Solvency Strategy. It was dated 5 years ago. Under the section labeled Risk Mitigation and Emergency Liquidity, there was a single bullet point. Source C. The daughter. Note: asset holds high income potential. Exploitable via emotional leverage. Status: backup capital. The room gasped. It wasn't a murmur this time. It was a collective recoil. Backup capital. I read the words aloud. Not daughter, not family, not Megan. Backup capital. I pointed at the screen. That is what I was to you. I wasn't a person. I was an insurance policy you kept in the guest room. You spent my mother's legacy, and then you kept me around as a spare battery in case you needed to drain me dry again. I looked at Mr. Sterling, the lawyer. He was staring at the screen, looking physically ill. Mr. Sterling, I said, I assume you are seeing this. That document proves premeditated financial abuse. It proves intent. Mr. Sterling didn't say a word. He just closed his briefcase, turned his back on Calvin, and walked toward the exit. No! Calvin cried out, reaching for him. Sterling, wait! It is out of context! But Sterling kept walking. That was the domino that tipped the rest. Mr. Henderson, the major investor who had challenged Calvin earlier, stepped forward. He didn't look at Calvin. He looked at the room. I am officially withdrawing my partnership with Hartley Meridian, Henderson announced, his voice booming, and I will be instructing my team to initiate a forensic audit of every dime I have ever invested with this man. Me too, another voice called out. It was the banker from the second row. Consider your credit lines frozen. Calvin, effective immediately. And the Chamber of Commerce will be launching an ethics inquiry, the woman in the red blazer added, already typing on her phone. It was over. The empire wasn't just crumbling, it was being vaporized. Brent, who had been standing by the bar looking stunned, suddenly snapped. The reality of his future, a future without trust funds, without fast cars, without status, crashed down on him. You crazy witch! Brent screamed, his face twisted and ugly. He lunged toward the stage, but 2 security guards stepped in his way. You ruined us! You destroyed this family. Are you happy now? We are going to be on the street because of you. I looked at my brother. I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a profound sense of distance. You are proving my point. Brent, I said calmly, you aren't screaming because you lost a sister. You are screaming because you lost an income stream. You don't care about the family, you care about the financing. I turned back to the table. I picked up the pen that Calvin had tried to force into my hand earlier. I looked at the capital injection agreement one last time. Here are my final terms, I said to Calvin and Elaine. They stood huddled together, looking like shipwreck survivors on a rock. 1, I listed, counting on my fingers. I will not sign any papers to save you. Not today, not ever. 2, I will not lend you a single cent. If you lose the house, do not call me. If you lose the cars, do not call me. If you are hungry, apply for food stamps like the people you used to mock. 3, there will be no private meetings, no phone calls, no emails. Any communication regarding the repayment of my stolen inheritance will go through my lawyer in the district attorney's office. I held up the contract. I am not the poor relative anymore, I said, my voice steady. I am not the joke you tell at parties. I am the woman who finally learned how to respect herself enough to walk away. I gripped the contract with both hands, with a sharp, ripping sound that echoed through the silent ballroom. I tore it in half. Then I tore it again, and again. I let the pieces flutter down onto the table like confetti at a funeral. Then, I reached into my purse and pulled out the cream-colored invitation, the celebration of family legacy. I tossed it onto the pile of torn paper. You can keep the legacy, I said. I will keep my life. I turned my back on them. I didn't look at Elaine, who was sinking to the floor in a puddle of crimson sequins. I didn't look at Calvin, who was staring at his hands as if he couldn't understand how they had become so empty. I walked down the stairs of the stage. The crowd parted for me. This time, they didn't pull away in disgust. They pulled away in fear and awe. They looked at me like I was a force of nature that had just swept through the room. The reporters thrust microphones in my face, shouting questions. "Megan, is it true about the insurance? Will you testify against your father? How much did they steal?" I didn't stop walking. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out 2 thick manila envelopes that I had prepared for this exact moment. I handed one to the reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. "It is all in there," I said. "The bank transfers, the emails, the pitch deck. Verify it yourself." I handed the second envelope to a woman I recognized as a state prosecutor who happened to be a guest. "For your office," I said. "I think you will find the section on identity theft particularly interesting." I walked through the double doors, out of the ballroom, and into the cool, quiet lobby of the St. Maro Plaza. The noise of the party, the shouting, the camera shutters, the chaos faded behind me. I walked out the front entrance. The valet was waiting. I didn't need my car. I had called a car service. A black sedan was idling at the curb. The driver opened the door. I slid into the leather seat. It was quiet. It was peaceful. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. "The airport," I said. "Take me home." As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the glittering facade of the hotel behind, I pulled out my phone. I dialed Tess. She answered on the first ring. She must have been watching the live stream, or maybe she was still in the lobby. "Megan?" Her voice was breathless. I looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline speeding past. I saw the lights of the city blurring into streaks of gold and red. For the first time in 33 years, I didn't feel the weight of expectation on my shoulders. I didn't feel the ghost of my mother's stolen money. I didn't feel the phantom limb of a family that never loved me. I felt light. "It is done, Tess," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and incredibly clear. I tore it up. I gave the files to the press. Mr. Henderson walked out. "It is all over." "And you?" Tess asked gently. "How are you?" I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that felt cleaner than it had in a decade. "I am free," I said. "There are no more knots, no more strings. I am finally free." I hung up the phone and leaned my head back against the seat, watching the road stretch out before me, open and wide and entirely my own. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed seeing justice served as much as I enjoyed writing it. Please leave a comment down below and let me know where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts on Megan's revenge. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can get this story out to more people who need a reminder to stand up for themselves. See you in the next one.